I started fishing as a very young boy. My father was a scientist in the Geological Survey of Canada.
Wow.
And every summer he had a Land Rover and a bunch of science stuff, and it was very cool.
Yeah.
And from Leduc, Alberta, all the way through to Lake Superior, different summer, different lakes. That was freshwater fishing.
Wow.
Saltwater fishing, my first salmon was in 1967, again with my father, in
Yeah.
a charter boat not too far from Oak Bay. And
Wow.
it slowed down a lot when I was raising kids and getting them through university, and since I've retired, I've done more hunting and fishing in the last 7 years than in my entire life before that.
Yes, and I was actually running the boat for him before I went to elementary school. So it's been a family thing for now. We're approaching, if we still had the business, it'd be 60 years plus.
I got involved through my dad when I was just a kid, and he introduced us into the tidal water fishing, and just kind of went through all the ranks of that and into high school and got into commercial fishing, and just got into the guiding industry for fishing, and just never got out of it, and still in it to this day.
When I got married, my father-in-law was a great fisherman. We used to go out here and roll around off Macaulay Point in the early 60s.
Yeah.
And then I joined the fishing club down here, and we got involved in that down here.
So it was a bit later in life that you got involved in fishing.
Yeah, early 60s. And I also fish Souk. We have a place out at Souk we stay, and we fish Souk area as well.
So I was born and raised in the south of England, and my dad was an avid angler, also a mariner of the sea. So where I lived in England, I was close to the sea behind the Isle of Wight, and I learned to sea fish and also fish for trout in the little forest streams that are in the south there.
Maybe just explain what are the impacts if the fishery isn't open. What are some of those impacts?
Well, Bob, it's crippling. You're going to talk to people today who depend on it for their livelihood. I can tell you unequivocally that if I was still in the business, it would be very, very difficult to proceed.
Right.
There are fish out here to catch. Right across over there, you've got Washington State, that whole line of mountain ranges.
Right.
They faced this problem 10 years ago, and they decided to take it head on with a combination of restoration, enhancement, and protecting their fisheries.
Right.
So they're presently producing 80 million Chinook salmon in Washington State that have their adipose fin clipped so that anglers can identify them from the wild stocks.
Right.
So what we're trying to get here is a very similar program that they have in Washington State. We would like to be able to retain hatchery fish. That sustains the fishery. It protects the wild fish because we're letting them go, and anglers have an incentive to go out and fish.
Well, it's based on the family business as owner-operator. It's me. And with these restrictions, if we don't go to a marked fishery and we go to that it's catch and release only, people do not pay to go on a guided fishing trip to do catch and release here.
Right.
This is not a trophy class area or anything. It's just people come fishing with me, they're tourists, and they want to catch a fish for dinner. It's really what it's all about.
If they even raise the price, our licenses are so reasonable. If they even raise the license to $40 and put all that money back in fish enhancement and hatcheries, we'd be fine.
Well, essentially for the last, ever since about 1995, there have been a series of significant cuts in DFO funding, for example, here on the West Coast. And so functions that were done by the department have been basically, the volunteer base takes care of it.
Right.
And just when they're trying to make progress, more barriers are put in place either from regulation or cost that precludes them from carrying out what had been done previously as a all-hands-on-deck volunteer effort.
Right. And some of these efforts that you're talking about too are seeing where you saw streams almost with no fish left, see them come back to levels of normalcy where there's thousands of fish where there was literally 10 or less before.
The track record of all these, we spoke about Craig Flower, others spoke about Craig Flower. I don't know if Millstream has been specifically mentioned, but there is incredible work being done by people like Peninsula Streams.
Right. And
it goes all the way up Vancouver Island and indeed across the west coast of British Columbia.
And I always thought it would be much better for us as Canadians to produce hatchery fish that we could catch.
Right.
We do. We produce about 40 million of them a year, but we don't mark them. So if you catch a Canadian hatchery fish, you can't tell the difference between it and a wild fish.
Right.
What we want to do is to mark all of the hatchery fish in Canada and have that opportunity here too to keep those fish. And What we have in CHINOOK is a project which is even one step better. When you make a hatchery fish and you release it into a river, it has that early life stage that it's come from a hatchery where it's known no predators at all, and you're putting it into a very rough environment for it to adjust to and to survive in. There's predators of seabirds, seals, raccoons, herons, all feed on little fish. And you put thousands of fish in a river and they don't survive very well. We take that one step further, and instead of putting them in the river, we acclimatize them in a pen for 3 to 4 weeks, feed them so that they're very healthy and robust, make sure, of course, that they're healthy before we put them in the pen, and then they can acclimatize to the river water because that pen is close to the river, and then we release them at a time where there's no predators around at night on an ebb tide, and they go, and then they get a much higher survival rate.
What we do is we run hatcheries in areas where there's a lack of fish returns. The Crakeflower Creek, and we took it over in 1987, they were down to 10 stock, 5 females and 5 males. We've brought that run up to 1,800 on some good years, 1,500. Our average year is probably 350, 400.
Wow.
Colquitt's Creek, we're just going to help them out now the last couple of years. And it's coho there, and they're all wild coho. The ones at Crakeflower, we actually clip fish. We take some broodstock to the hatchery, and we put about 30,000 fry into a lake to help enhance that in the lake. And they come down the Crakeflower Creek, where Crakeflower heads out towards the airport area, not that far out. And that's all wild coho. And that average run, the best year we had was 1,300. An average year there is about 400.
So where we go from is we do targeted enhancement. We invest the money, we do the research, and we can save these fish. But it takes a combined effort to do that.
Like so many British Columbians, some of my favorite memories are fishing with my family. If you believe the minister needs to start listening to the concerns of our BC fishing families and communities, I encourage you to call her at her office at 902-527-5655 or send an email to bernadette.jordan@parle.gc.ca. We must ensure that our children and our grandchildren have the opportunity to enjoy the great outdoors and participate in an angling tradition that has been a proud way of life for generations.